Both. Okay. It says that it's streaming. Let's hope it is. Here we go. All right. Last but not least, thank you for your patience as we figure out these last details here. Wonderful. Okay. I think we're ready to begin. We're going to record for those who need to watch or join later. All right, Baruch Hashem. Welcome, 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 Baruchim Habaim, to Awakening Torat Mussar Mindfulness, our weekly public offering where we delve into the Torah portion, and this special year where we delve into the Mishnah of the 48 to 51 ways of acquiring Torah and learning from our Mussar sages and really delving into this path of Mussar Mindfulness. I am Rabbi Chasya Oriel Steinbauer, the founder and director of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness. You are joining us on Moshash, on Motzei Shabbat, here in Haaretz in Israel. It is now Sunday, early in the morning, around 3:23 in the morning here. For those of you joining us way over on North and South America, perhaps Shabbat is over. If it's not, you'll be able to join us on podcast or watch the video later on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness. For those of you joining us all the way over on the eastern stream of New Zealand, Australia, any of the Southeast Asian countries, and further on over, it's already well into the day of Yom Rishon, of Sunday. So welcome, whether you're live or joining us later. This is available live streaming on Facebook and, of course, on our YouTube channel. It will also be posted later on Twitter and LinkedIn. And of course, visit us at the website at kehilatmussar.com to subscribe to our newsletter, to consider becoming a member, and then go to the blog section. There you will find all of these wonderful offerings where you will find that we started with Bereshit and then Parshat Noach, and now we are in Lech Lecha, which hopefully you've had a chance to delve into. If you're new, welcome. I will guide you as we head on our way. So in Lech Lecha comes from the book of Bereshit, of the 5 books of Moshe, known as Genesis in English. It's chapter 12, verse 1, through chapter 17, verse 27. And I'm going to give a summary of this Torah portion so you know what we're going to delve into. But mainly what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what we consider, at least this year, to be kind of the master middah, the master soul trait, personality trait, from the perspective of Mussar Mindfulness that really sticks out in this Torah portion. We also asked all of our viewers at different podcasts and a poll of what they thought was the master middah, and some of it will get covered. So hopefully you'll have a chance to respond in the next poll for Vayera. We'll delve in, we'll get to know a Mussar sage that I'll introduce to you, and hopefully that will cover everything that we need to cover today. And then we'll look into acquiring Torah. What is the third way in which we can acquire Torah? So with the merit of our ancestors and with the help of God, we jump in together to learn Torat Mussar Mindfulness. Today, on the Hebrew calendar, well, we've already jumped into the next day, but during Shabbat, of course, that took place on November 9th, 2024. It was the 8th of Cheshvan. The Hebrew year was Tafshin Pei 5785. So, what happens in this Torah portion? God, Hashem, commands Avram to go from his country, his homeland, his home, his father's house, to the land that God will show him. Avram and Sarai, his spouse, they traveled to Eretz Canaan together with their nephew Lot. And Avram, so there's a famine in the land after they arrive. So they have to head down to Egypt, which has its own history and story, which hopefully you've read. I'm not going to cover it now. I'm just giving a summary. Then when they return to the land of Eretz Canaan, both Avram and Lot have large amounts of herds of cattle. And their shepherds begin to argue. And so after discussion with Lot, Lot decides to head down, move to Sodom. Now it says in the Torah, just as a starting point, that Sodom is a very wicked city, meaning the inhabitants are both called Ra and also, what is the language? It comes from Chatat, sinners, Chatatim, I think. So this is the first time in the Torah that we've seen both Ra'im and Chataim together. So considered both evil and sinners, sinning, okay? I mean, we've had some harsh language before in Parashat Noach, right? Where humanity was just full of Hamas, violence, just not good. But this is a whole different level. Then a group of 4 kings wages war against a group of 5 kings. The 4 kings win, conquering Sodom, and they actually kidnap Lot. They take him captive. Avram chases down the 4 kings, defeats their armies, and rescues Lot. God makes a special promise to Avram that he will have children as numerous as the stars in the sky, and they will inherit Eretz Canaan. Sarai, who is barren and has not given birth to offspring, has her servant Hagar marry Avram in order that they could have children. Sagar and Avram have a son named Yishmael. God then changes Avram's name to Avraham and gives him the mitzvah of Brit Milah, circumcision. God also changes Sarai's name to Sarah and says that the Brit, the covenant, will continue through her son, Yitzhak, who will be born later. So keep that theme in mind. Later, everything later, later, later. That's a brief summary. Now, I've decided to select a middah that you probably haven't even heard of before. But it deeply is intimately involved in the Eightfold Path of the Dharma. This idea of seeing clearly, which you might say falls under the umbrella of wise discernment. So if we were going to imagine the middah of balanced seeing clearly, over here would be someone who doesn't see clearly at all, who probably lives more so in the land of wishful thinking, who sees the world the way they want it to be rather than seeing it how it is. And over here is someone who sees too clearly, who perhaps can maybe only get stuck in seeing what is right before them very clearly, but can't either have the imagination or maybe even potential to see what could be, or also basing their discernment on the wisdom from the past, handed down to us, B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, by our ancestors. So it's someone who's not balanced, even though they might be seeing clearly too much in the here and now. Okay, so balanced is someone who sees what is before them, is able to discern what needs to be done from seeing that clearly, and acts with balanced zerizut of enthusiasm and moves forward. Now, the caveat of this for Avram, who I will call Avram because he doesn't come Avraham until later, is, and even Sarai, okay, is that for them to see clearly, right, it's based profoundly on balanced faith, emunah, and bitachon, trust in God. So when I asked for participation of what you thought was the master midot or middah for this Torah portion, many of you, of course, voted for emunah and bitachon, trust in God, which are classic interpretations of this Torah portion. The language is even used in this Torah portion. For instance, if we go to, I think it's coming here, 112 later. Yes, if you go to chapter 15, verse 6, it says, Ve'emin ba'Adonai, okay? And Avram here, what does he do? He has faith in Adonai, okay? That's the shoresh is Aleph Mem Nun to Amunah. Some people translate it as he put his trust in God, but if it was really trust, it would be bitachon. But he puts his faith in Adonai, and what happens, right? Yaksheveha lo tzedakah. And God reckoned it to his merits, meaning God thought about it, applied to it, tzedakah, righteousness, his merits. So I want to just say that these midot of the whole system of Mussar mindfulness are like the wonderful wooden spoken wheel that we often see in the Dharma, right? But here in the path of Mussar mindfulness, the middah, the central middah that I might mention, like seeing clearly, which is about wise discernment also, has these spokes, and that they are deeply interrelated and they almost can't exist without each other, right? So let's just say that emunah and bitachon, trust in God, and faith are deeply connected to seeing clearly. So why did I pick this? Let's just move through what it means, why I selected seeing clearly, okay? So here is a man at 75 years old who obviously, without us given background about him, but I think it's pretty obvious, at least I feel this way, who has been practicing for many years. What do I mean by that? He is ready for his mission. Nobody would hear the voice of God tell him or her to leave their country, their homeland, their father's house, to a land that God is going to show them, and then just leave and pick up everything and everyone they know and are connected to, unless you are ready, unless you are prepared, unless in some ways you are Ba'al Bitachon, like the wonderful Rav Yosef of the school of Novorok, one of the schools of Mussar. Ba'al Bitachon means the master of trust in God. You might think from the story that this is the first time that Avram has either communicated with God or even knew of God or had a relationship with God. It starts, there's no history, right? There's no identifying formula or preliminary observation, like the one that introduced Noach and the Noach narrative, right? Instead, the patriarch and God in communication burst into the scene of history for us, right? It's an astounding suddenness, so much so that we're left obviously with more questions than answers. But for me, it's pretty obvious that, and maybe it's about my trust in God and also the history and the stories passed down to us, that there's a deep history and relationship here. This is a 75-year-old who is ready for his mission. As I said, these first 75 years passed in total silence to us in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible. God's call comes in an instant without forewarning or preparation, it seems. Again, I feel like in those 75 years, there was definitely preparation on the part of Avram. I have no evidence to prove to that from the Torah. I think it's just evident in that he goes. And it's brief, it's compelling in its demands. It's truly for us the beginning, in some ways, of Avram's life, at least as how it's going to relate to us as descendants of Avram, right? So the events unfold rapidly, and so seeing clearly, here is God coming onto the scene with him, says, go forth from your native land, your father's house, to the land I will show you. Gives him basically a set of promises that contain 7 elements. This is a 75-year-old who is seeing clearly. He's listening to what God has said. He sees the merit of it. He has deep emunah, faith, and trust in God. And he moves forward with the command that's been given to him. He has Sarai with him, his partner in crime, and he has Lot, his nephew, and then they have a whole bunch of people with them who want to go on this journey also. And so they're heading off, and the minute that they arrive in the land, there is a challenge that probably would throw off most of us, right? If anything, you might think, okay, this is a little bit of delayed gratification, because here he's just been promised 7 things, 7 elements that he'll be made for him a great nation. God will bless him. He'll make his name great. She'll be a blessing. That God's going to bless those who bless him and curse those that curse him, and that all the families of the earth will bless themselves through them. So Avram, the 75-year-old, is heading off into the scene into the land of Canaan, and is holding these 7 elements, right? Thinking, who knows if he's thinking, okay, I'm gonna get those things immediately, right, when I enter the land. But we certainly, as the reader, expect or want that. Okay, this is where we have to look as a practice in reading Torah as a Mussar text, that we have to look at what do we bring to this text? What is our own response or reactivity? Often when we read this, it gets projected by commentators on the Parshanim and even ourselves that we think Avram would have expected and wanted this immediately. And it'll go on. I'm going to bring more examples. But before I do, I want to say one of the key things of this path of Torat Mussar Mindfulness, the Torah of Mussar Mindfulness, is that we have to learn how to read a Mussar text. And I read Torah as a Mussar text. And what does that mean, right? Ideally, this is a journey of learning, of acquiring Torah, shared with teacher and with chavruta, with a partner. We don't just read it through chapter by chapter as you would read a lovely novel or any other book that you might pick off the shelf at a library or buy from a bookstore, right? Instead, you dip in one line at a time, maybe a few lines. We read commentary on it. We think about it. We contemplate, right? And when we read it, we step back and compare it to our own experience, right? And we examine and discuss our own life in relation to what is being shared in the text. And often we look for ways in which we aren't ourselves, are or not fulfilling the ideals and the ideas that we understand in the text. It's almost we're in conversation with God and our ancestors through the text. And we, of course, want to take notes. In this way, we not only absorb the substance of the teaching, right? We gain insight into ourselves. Through self-examination, right, that accompanies the study, right? We definitely can begin to discover gaps between how we're living our own lives and how our ancestors lived. We can also learn gaps of how they live versus how we live or how we hope to live, right? Often we'll study the same section again and again. We certainly do over and over again in the yearly Torah cycle. Like we will visit Lech Lecha again in 5786, B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, right? And we do this as part of our Mussar mindfulness practice. Often this can reveal where we need to do some inner work, and it's really a blessing. It's part of our path of how we learn a Mussar text. So let's continue with seeing clearly and wise discernment. He ends up in the land of Canaan with everyone, and what happens immediately? There is a famine. That's a big challenge, right? That's not a small thing. It's not like a famine today. A famine back then means all his livestock are going to die, probably even before the humans, because the humans can attempt to live off of what water is left for a while and even eat the animals that they have. But eventually the animals will have no water and no grass or that which to eat because the land needs water, needs rain in the land of Canaan and Eretz Israel in order to provide what that is needed. Okay, so even if you are really wealthy, and what is wealth back then? It means you have lots of livestock. So even if you are very wealthy, you soon won't be in a famine back then. So there's a famine in the land, and he has to head down. Avram has to head down with everyone to Egypt, where there is not a famine, right? Because Egypt lives off of the water of the Nile, okay, which is just very different. The famine is very severe. Now, just to give you some context here, let's just be really upfront and honest. Avram and his whole companions are strangers. They are gerim. They are not residents of Canaan. They've come from outside land. They are deeply vulnerable. They were already vulnerable entering the land of Canaan, and now they're even more vulnerable coming because of a famine into Egypt, a land that they've never been to and don't know, as far as we know. So in some ways, to enter in already such a vulnerable state, it makes you even more vulnerable to what is going to arise, right? So what happens? His partner in crime, his wife, Sarai, gets kidnapped by the Egyptians, who then give her to Paro, the executive of state, right? Like the equivalent of the president or Rosh Memshala, prime minister. So this is deeply troubling, right? Because they're already so vulnerable, right? And they have left the land of Canaan for famine, right? But talk about seeing clearly. Before they head down to Egypt, Avram sees clearly before him what they're potentially going to run into. Because he's seeing clearly how the people behave in the land of Canaan, and then when they enter Egypt, what he's witnessing before him, he's also 75 years old, meaning he brings a certain history of knowledge with him to help him see things clearly, not how he wants them to be. So if he was going to see things how he wanted them to be, right? How does any of us want things to be? We want peace, we want quiet, we want people to be kind and ethical and moral and respectful. So when he comes down from a famine, if he was seeing things the way he wanted things to be, he would expect and want the Egyptians to open their arms to them and feed them and care for them while they're so vulnerable. Okay, that's not reality on the ground. So he sees things clearly. He says to Sarai, you have to, he doesn't even say you have to, he asks her, this is where they're partners in crime. He says, if the Egyptians see you and learn that you are my wife, they will kill me and let you live, right? But that doesn't mean that she will live and thrive. She will be a vulnerable woman without a husband or father. She essentially most likely will become a slave or some other low position in society where she will be deeply vulnerable and most likely raped or treated otherwise poorly. And so he says, please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me and I can remain alive thanks to you. This is seen very clearly. Does it trouble us? Yes. God forbid we ever be put in such a situation where our lives are at risk. We know that we could be potentially killed if someone understood our relationship to somebody else. And we ask that person to lie on our behalf so that we may live. This is seen clearly. It was also seen clearly the morality on the ground, right? Sarai calculated everything. She thought, if I don't lie and I say, no, he's really my husband, they will kill him. And then I will certainly be taken and treated awful. If I say that he's my brother, at least he will remain alive. And perhaps with God's help, he will help free me or somehow get me out. Or at least I'll be treated better because they keep my brother alive and they're most likely not going to treat me as poorly if I have a brother who serves as a patriarch. That's the society we're dealing with. So they both see clearly. So she is kidnapped, she's taken, God intervenes, okay, to make sure that she is not raped and not taken and kept by Paro. And they are essentially sent away. And Paro sends Avram away with much. Sends him off with cattle and who knows what else, right? And so they return. Lot and what's actually very interesting about the whole thing is we don't hear of Lot during the whole time that he enters Egypt with them. So who knows what's happening with Lot at that time? Maybe some people would venture to say that he stayed during the famine, but I don't believe so. I think everyone went down with them, right? But we just don't know, right? So Avram returns. He's very rich in cattle and silver and gold, and Lot also has much cattle also. Unfortunately, the herdsmen begin to argue. There's just not, it seems to be a financial issue in the sense that they feel there's not enough land. So no sooner does Avram return from kidnapping of his wife, that this now new challenge for the Baal Bitchon, the master of trust in God, right? The one who sees clearly before him, right? This time it's affluence that, and reactivity to that affluence, right? That poses a threat to family harmony and cohesion. It's not just they're quarreling, but they're having to deal with the Canaanites and the Perizzites who are also dwelling in the land. And Avram, with unbelievable respect, chesed, loving kindness, again, seeing clearly what he sees clearly what is important here. What is important here is my relationship with Lot, not this bickering over cattle and land and who has enough space. So he goes to his nephew and says, you pick the best of the land. You look ahead of you, north, south, east, west. You pick it. You get first pick and you can go. Or stay here, either way, right? And he does. He intervenes. He sees clearly what's happening before him. He doesn't get caught up in reactivity, so he doesn't shut down and not see clearly at all. Live in, I told you that world of seeing things how he wished he saw them. So that would be like they're really not arguing, or we'll work it out. We'll get along. When really the solution is that they need to separate, right? Whereas the other side might get so caught up in it that probably would end up in reactivity and maybe even an argument and fighting, right? Because maybe even from good intention, but you would want to try to find a way to stay together even with quarreling, right? So he sees clearly and they separate. Lot heads down to Sodom. Okay. Then another challenge, which we might say a problem, right, is that essentially the 4 kings go to battle against the 5 kings. The ones who win kidnap, and here's another kidnapping, kidnap Lot, take him as captive and his family, essentially. And Avram sees clearly what's before him. He sees clearly his responsibility, that he must attempt to save his family member, Lot, and that he will do with what's in his privilege and power in order to respond wisely, right? There's no getting frozen in the situation and not acting, or in hyper reactivity of just getting caught up in the mess of that reactivity that can happen, right? There's no fawning. He doesn't try to cause the kings to be on his side and get release and let go. Instead, it contains the first biblical report of warfare. And so we see a new side to Avram, one that serves to emphasize his loyalty to family, the redeeming of captives, which now he's, with God's help, redeemed Sarai, his wife, and redeemed now Lot and his family. He has a total disdain for material reward. So after he gets back, the kings offer, especially the king of Sodom, wants to take his people back and have him take the booty of whatever was captured during the war. And Avram says, I'm not touching anything. I'm not taking anything of yours, right? Seeing clearly who is before him. This is the king of a people and a land, an area, a town that has been called evil and sinning, evil sinners, right? Okay. So he's like, no way am I taking material war from you. Seeing very clearly what's before him, right? And of course, faith in the power of the few against the many, trust in God, that this is the right thing and that God will be with him. This very seen clearly what's before him, okay? And then, of course, I mean, it comes up over and over and over again, right? The final thing I will say is the beautiful episode that I think we need to pay attention to, which ties into how we acquire Torah. Okay, we had learned in Bereshit that the first way we acquire Torah is from limud, right? Talmud, which is learning and studying, of Torah is different than acquiring it. And I talked about that during Bereshit. You're welcome to go back and look at that. Then number two, the second way we acquire Torah, we covered during Parashat Noach, the Torah portion last week, which was Shmi'at Ha'ozen, which we kind of translated as, it really means the listening ear, but it's really, it's almost like seeing clearly, but hearing clearly. This sense of mindful, appropriate, wise listening. We talk about wise speech. Well, here's wise listening, right? Getting the full picture, hearing what's not being said, in addition to what's being said, therefore. So the third way that we acquire Torah is arichat sfayim, right? Which gets translated as orderly speech. Really, it's about wise speech, the path of wise, appropriate speech. It involves many aspects, such as admitting to the truth, not replying in haste, that we don't interrupt, that we answer to the point. It also is that one learns from the impact of their speech, like, for instance, over time. So something really amazing happens here in our Torah portion, which is, up until now, Avram has been silent before God, like Noah, follows orders. I mean, we might call Avram 1 Noah, right? He responds to the commandments, right? To go and to do as God says and listens. Really following this whole concept of arichat sfayim. He doesn't reply in haste. He doesn't interrupt. All that's there. And then all of a sudden comes in chapter 15, where Hashem appears to Avram again. This is after the warring with the kings and getting Lot back, right? Saving him from captivity. Hashem appears, says, "Fear not, I am your shield, your reward will be very great." Boom, Avram speaks. Talk about coming out of like nowhere, out of history. He speaks. And it's not just speaking, it's like a pouring out of his despair. It's a very, if anything, I would say there's a bearing of the bitterness of his soul. It's a brief, poignant outburst. It's bordering on utter despair. If anything, we might say maybe Avram waited too long to communicate, if we were going to have judgment towards him. But he goes in and he says, right, this is the first time Avram speaks to him. He's had this unquestioning obedience. He broke ties with his family at 75 years old, leaves, becomes a ger, totally vulnerable, a wanderer in a strange land. His life has been repeatedly in danger. Famine, kidnapping of his wife, kidnapping of his nephew, infighting with the shepherds with Lot. Years have rolled by. The promise of progeny, of having a son and as many descendants of the count of stars, has not materialized. Yet Avram held faith and trust in God, kept maintaining his silence, right? Now this has all changed. He says, "O Lord God, what can you give me, seeing that I shall die childless? And the one in charge of my household will be domestic Eliezer," right? His servant. He goes on to say, "Since you've granted me no offspring, my steward will be my heir." Right? And all of a sudden Hashem listens and responds. So responds because Hashem is seeing clearly back. He's seeing his pain, his despair. It says, no, that one will not be your heir, but your own issue will be your heir. He takes him outside, lifts him, carries him outside. What does it mean that God took him outside? That's so intimate and beautiful, and so seeing clearly of what is needed in the moment. Listen, I can't even imagine. How does Hashem take him outside? Takes him outside, look towards the heaven, count the stars if you're able to count them. So shall your offspring be. And what does this do? Okay, I want you to remember this about going outside and seeing the stars and seeing nature and connecting, being really present and seeing clearly, seeing the stars, seeing clearly what's really before you. And what does this do to Avram's reactivity, to his anxiety, where maybe for a bit his faith, his trust in God might be shaken a little. I don't even think it was shaken, trust in God, to be honest with you, or even the faith. I just think he had a moment of challenge and despair. He still really believed what God had said through those 7 promises within the promise, right? He just thought it would be through Eliezer, right? So this is where the statement comes, verse 6, Ve'emin be'Adonai. And he had faith in God. He had trust in God. Right when he went out and breathed and looked at the stars, he had faith in him. He trusted in him. And then God felt it too. And God knew, right? Because he had put his trust in Hashem, God reckoned it to his righteousness, to his merit. It's the first time we're learning that Avram has merit. Avram has righteousness. The thing that this is what he's developed into. This is what he has been made into from these 75 years and now this interaction with God. He is worthy. He is walking with God now, and he's talking with God. It's been a total change. Okay, this has made him worthy. It's almost as if God was doing this constant challenge back and forth, because God was waiting for that speech, for that acquiring Torah through orderly speech. He knew that he was faithful. He knew that he trusted him. He followed orders just like Noah, right? But God wanted him to walk with him. God wanted him to speak. God wanted him to share his despair, right? His moment. And that's very profound. Okay, this is when everything changes. Where the scene opens with fear and maybe even a little bit of depression, closes with a firm statement of his steadfastness, Avram's, and that the promise will be realized. And it's just so profound. As we said, now Avram, through his orderly speech, through his arichat svatayim, he is not only worthy of acquiring Torah, he's worthy of God's reward, right? And it's secured through a covenant. So it's very profound. So let's jump into the final thing that arechat svatayim, of how we acquire Torah, is what comes out of our mouth is to line up with our values and ideals. And Avram obviously is a wonderful example of that, and how we can apply it and practice it in our life. It's I think it's very important for us to consider that, to try to pause, to try to think, am I about to say? Is it the right moment? Am I the right speaker? Is the person who's listening ready to hear what I'm about to share? Is it honest? Is it as kind as it can be? Sometimes not all speech can be kind. Is it in alignment with my values and my ideals, right? So the final thing I will say before I teach us a little bit about a Mussar sage is that according to Hashem's promise, God's promise, that the land of Israel is going to be an inheritance to the Jewish people forever, through Avram, through his descendants, right? And forever means that even though the Jewish people may not always physically live in the land, which there always has been a presence, but sometimes in the minority, right? That the land, our ancestral land of Israel, and the people will always be linked together. And this is here promised to Avram by God, even though Avram will actually never take possession of it, of the land, in his own lifetime. But look how he behaved as a ger, as someone who was vulnerable and was not part of any of the communities or tribes in the land of Canaan. When he went to war against the kings to retrieve Lot, he's not behaving as a fearful ger. He's behaving as someone who knows that he, through his descendants, are going to possess that land. He's going to travel up it. You know how far he travels up? He travels all the way up into modern day Lebanon in order to save Lot. It's phenomenal. And he started south, low, very low in the land of Canaan and what is modern day Medinat Yisrael. So this is someone who lived as if he were possessing it, even though it will never become fully under his people and tribe and community. But there's something, talk about seeing clearly. All of us need to see very clearly that our ancestral land, the land of Israel, is our inheritance of our people forever, regardless if you are here or not. That's very profound, okay? We're very much linked together. Talk about seeing clearly, that we need to see that clearly, right? Okay, so let's quickly introduce you to a Mussar sage, and then we'll move into our practice. I just want to say that I'm going to slowly start introducing Rav Yosef Yozer Horvitz, who ends up becoming the altar of Novordik, the Mussar school of Novordik. And I want to introduce him briefly because the rabbi I'm going to introduce you to actually comes from that lineage and school. He was born in Puljian, a small town in Lithuania, in 1850. He dies in 1919. His father, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Horvitz, was himself very steeped in Torah study. And he's quite profound. We're going to learn more about him, God willing, next week. But the key thing why I brought up bitachon, trust in God, and the idea of Baal bitachon, a master of bitachon, of trust in God, is that he is really the one who decides to focus that middah, trust in God as the central middah and his central to his practice and life path. He is the one who ends up signing. BB is in bet Baal Betachon. He always acts first, comes to a decision with determination, with zerizut, with enthusiasm, wise discernment, seeing clearly, absolute commitment to seeking his goal in Torah and Mussar, and then the support comes. He doesn't wait for the support, he acts, and then it comes. And that is what we see in Avram also. He acts, and the support comes, right? He acts, and the support comes. Think about it. He he went as commanded, left his homeland, and God supports him. There's a famine. He acts, he heads down to feed his family. His wife is kidnapped. God with him acts. She is saved. They head back. Conflict with Lot's shepherds. He acts. It unfolds as the way it's supposed to. Lot gets kidnapped through a war, through kings. He acts. He goes to war. It ends up that he's able to save Lot. This is the outcome, and this is it keeps going, because he is so centered and seeing clearly through his faith and trust in God. So I'm introducing you to Rabbi Bruk, B-R-U-K. He taught at the Beit Yosef Novorak Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. And there's a wonderful story actually coming from Rav Hillel Goldberg, who brought his own students to his yeshiva to learn from him. And I'm just going to quickly summarize it till I get to more of my point about it. But, the students were so excited to, sit before such a Mussar master, right? And wanted to learn from him. And they asked it question after question. And finally, he was silent. And the students were all waiting and wondering, right? And he looks up at Reb Hillel and he says, Lo yachol she'ela yesh teshuvah. Not every question has an answer. And the students are waiting eagerly. Like, what does that mean? Okay, yep. Like waiting. He then repeats that answer, right? And the students accept, okay, he's not gonna answer, right? So they thank him, they get up and they leave, but they're tormented. They say to Reb Hillel as they leave, what did he mean? Why didn't he answer? When will he answer? Surely he'll answer you if he won't answer us. Please check back with him. He must have our answers, right? This goes on for 6 months, the students badger Reb Hillel. So finally, Reb Hillel figures out, he thinks, with God's help, what's going on with Rabbi Bruk, right? So he knows that answers satisfied, right? When a questioner, all of us as questioners, need to struggle. So we need to acquire a certain depth in our learning and living Torat Mussar Mindfulness, this path, before issues can acquire their real significance. So too with Avram, right? He needed to move through certain challenges in certain parts of his life. 75 years old, he won't even have his son until he's 100, another 25 years, right? Before they're going to acquire their real significance. And even later, right? We're going to go into Lech Lecha, then Vayera, and then Chayei Sarah. We have like 3 Torah portions dedicated to this amazing ancestor, our patriarch. Okay, so even the greatest Torah scholars that we could sit and listen to could verbalize all the profanities without really knowing what they're talking about. So Rabbi Bruk meant that to address every verbal concern, every fear, every question, it can generate the idea and the belief that discussing Judaism, discussing Torat Mussar Mindfulness, however profoundly, sets one on the path to the essence. And that's not necessarily true. So Torah is not only intellectual. This path that we're on is behavioral and spiritual. It is a program for imbuing life with the presence of Hashem, with God. So it is a tool for stretching us beyond verbal knowledge or even mechanical observance of Torah. It is to live this path, to live as a Jew, to live Judaism so intensely, so earnestly, that answers to questions about spiritual integrity arise from our own breast. Not every question has an answer by someone else. True, Torah gives us guidance, Torah scholars give us guidance, but only each of us on this path can integrate Torah and its guidance into our lives, into our families, into our professions, and into the world. So Rabbi Brooks sent away these young students, right? Creatively disturbed, right? He reached beyond their defenses to agitate their souls, to involve them in profound issues, right? In effect, he says, you want easy answers from the Torah? You think that intellectual resolution exhausts issues? No, no, no. These are large matters. You must work at them. This comes from Rav Hillel Goldberg's Illuminating the Generations. So too with Avram, in his moments of, give me the surety, answer it, fix it. God says, step outside. I'm going to carry you. I'm going to take you outside, and you're going to stand and look at the stars. And you're going to be with that. You're going to be with that struggle. You're going to be with that faith and trust. You're going to be with see clearly what's before you. And that is it. That is Avram. He worked at it, and he continued to work at it, and he will continue to work at it. It's not over, right? It's not so simple. So with that, we're going to move into our mindfulness meditation practice. I invite you to assume whatever posture you need right now to be able to acquire Torah. Is this part of the path also, right? This beautiful concentration and practice and being able to observe without reactivity. I'm going to come to the edge of my seat and sit upright in my dignified posture. I really feel I'm created in the image and likeness of the divine. You too can be seated in a seat, on the zafu, on a meditation cushion, walking back and forth, walking meditation, not going anywhere in particular, standing in a mountain pose, or lying down with the eyes open so you remain awake and alert, right? So for me, I'm going to ground my feet in Mother Earth so I really feel present. And I'm going to close my eyes so I can basically take away any visual stimulation that will pull me away from the present moment of being here. If you need to keep your eyes open, just lower your gaze so that you can not bring in much, if anything, into the visual field, okay? So we're going to begin with our 3 deep cleansing breaths, inviting the gift of oxygen, inhalation, and exhale. This next one, make your exhale double the amount of time of the inhale. So inhalation and exhale. This last one, realizing this hakarat tov, this gratitude of awakening to the good. We're going to lift up the shoulders when we inhale and let them fall on the exhale. Really inviting ease, the gift of quieting, of coming to stillness, of arriving. Inviting your whole heart, soul, mind, body here together with me for this meditation. Really doing a loving scan of your body, inviting all that is going on, seeing if anything's calling for your loving attention. Like I'm having a little bit of sciatic pain actually on my right side. And so I just really honor it with compassion. And I notice it. I even say it, I'll take care of you a little later, in the sense I might ice it later or do some stretches. And so just acknowledging that that sensation is there. And then I try to actually evolve my practice into emotions, right? Are there any emotions that are arising with whatever is calling for your loving attention and the sensations of the body? So for instance, I might have the emotions of fear's too strong, but maybe a little bit of worry or frustration at there being sciatic pain. And so I notice that. And I come to that with self-compassion, right? I recognize that I need some nurturing, right? And I can calm any reactivity. I can notice it without trying to fix it or push it away or go into denial, just moving through the practice with each breath. And then finally, we pay attention to our thoughts. Is there any thought going on that's dominating and calling for your loving attention? It could be a story or a movie running. So for instance, I might have some thoughts around, right? The sciatica pain is back. Who knows? I'm creating a story right now. I'm really not having a story. We could all have a story. So if we notice that, we just notice it, right? The fact that we've woken up to the story or the thoughts that are dominating, we bring the attention back to the breath, back to the anchor, my voice and the breath, really inviting more ease and comfort, settling in very heavy into your sit bones if you're seated. This is a form of grounding. Seeing clearly what is before us. Gift of relaxing and being here in the present moment together. So one practice in our meditation could be to review. This is part of the reviewing the Torah text as a Mussar text of what we encountered. So we could begin to review even with images in our minds, or it could just be simply reviewing in the heart or with thoughts what we went through in the Torah portion, and seeing if there's any response or reactivity. Maybe there's something that was unpleasant to you or really pleasant there's certainly been reactivity among some of our Parshanim, our commentators, throughout the 2,000 years of rabbinic exegesis, right? Some of them very much for having disdain, for instance, towards Avram's behavior of lying that he was the brother of Sarai down in Egypt. For instance, Ramban, wonderful scholar coming out of Spain, feels that he should have had trust in God and should have told the truth that he was the husband and trust that God would save them, that he never should have put Sarai in that uncompromising position of potentially being raped. And so we read this and we encounter this judgment in this commentary, and we see, do we have that too? Do we have that judgment towards Avram and his behavior? What is the judgment avoiding? Is it avoiding having to look and see clearly at our own selves and our own behavior? When have we been so compromised with fear of our own life that we had to make such a decision that put our lives at risk, put our spouse's lives at risk, and anyone else with us? When have we encountered that, if ever, where we had to evaluate kind of the ladder of morality? Do I ask her to lie and she agrees to lie in order to save my life, and that her life may be saved too, but she'll still be taken and raped? Or do I not intervene and I will be killed as her husband, most likely? And then she will most certainly be raped and most certainly will be at the lower end of society and treated poorly, if not enslaved. Those seem to be within his knowledge of seeing clearly the two choices before him. So we look at this as potential of our own practice. Are we having judgment? Let us evaluate our own values. Are we using our speech to live by those values? God forbid we are in a similar situation. How would we behave? What does that reflect about our path and our own arichat sfatayim, our orderliness of our speech? Are we living out our values, our ideals? So this is how we go through, even in meditation, of moving through the Torah portion, remembering it, recalling it, reviewing our notes. What can it teach us about our own path? We're going to spend the next few minutes in silence for you to reflect on what you learned about your path and your values from Lech Lecha. I will ring the bell when we are to come out of the meditation. Your mind may have wandered. And the minute you wake up to it, just bring yourself back to your practice of reviewing any judgment, reactivity, or your own neutral or pleasant or unpleasant responses to what occurs in Avram's life in Lech Lecha. I will close with one final image before I ring the bells that I used to have much reactivity to this, being angry at Avram, judging him, feeling that he shouldn't have compromised Sarai this way, not giving her any power or agency, the fact that she consented. I used to say that, women did not have hardly any power back then and definitely had to be under the care of a husband or father. And I didn't believe that she had any agency or power. But over time, if you look clearly at the text, seeing clearly is the practice. When it comes to her being barren and not reproducing a male heir for her husband, she, in her own power, and again, you might say that she felt desperate, and this is what a woman had to do back then. But just stick with me for a minute. She brings Hagar, her slave, her servant, and says to Avram, marry her, reproduce an heir through her. Perhaps I will be built up through her. And Avram, seeing clearly, listening to the voice of his wife, seeing that she is seeing clearly also. This is her choice. This is all she feels available to her right now. This is her exercising what power she has in the moment. He consents and agrees. And then later on, when Hagar becomes pregnant with the heir that will be Sarai's, and her Sarai gets lowered in Hagar's eyes. She then treats Sarai poorly, does not respect her does not hold the same honor and kavod. And Sarai, out of her own, seeing clearly what is before her, protests to her husband, who then, seeing clearly what's before him, seeing what is needed, seeing that his wife needs some power in this situation, says, it's your servant, do with her what you please. And it's at that moment that I realized she does have some power and agency. It may make us feel uncomfortable, it may be not how we want, but there clearly is a partnership here where both are attempting to see clearly what is before them and to respond with what skills they have in the moment, with what they believe to be the wise discernment before them in order to maintain the household and what is next. If your eyes are closed for the meditation, gently and slowly open them. If it is your practice to bow after meditating, please do so, bowing to Hashem, to God, for bringing us to this moment, bowing to our ancestors for passing on this path and teachings of the Torat Mussar Mindfulness, bowing to each other for taking refuge in this path and the teachings and in God together. So grateful for your presence and practice of being here and supporting us as a community, the Institute for Holiness. So we are very blessed today to thank and to honor and be very joyful about that this session was sponsored by Jeffrey and Pam Horowitz, coming out of Nyack, New York, Arasot Abrit in the United States. Wonderful, wonderful supporters of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness, where they are dedicating and sponsoring this session to each other in honor of their 51st wedding anniversary. And they said that Avram and Sarai love having guests, which we will learn in Vayera. Their tent is open from all four sides so that people could come in from any direction in which they are traveling. We learned from the Midrash. Avram and Sarai feed and take care of all their guests and teach them about God. So too with Pam and Jeffrey, they have created that in their home, both in New York and especially in Mexico, where they have another home. They are beyond good hosts. I know they welcomed my spouse and my family and me when we were with them in New York. So we thank you for your sponsorship, supporting and enabling this weekly public offering. Thank you, Pam and Jeffrey. And to the rest of you, you have an opportunity to sponsor. Also, reach out to me at Rabbi Chasya at kehilatmussar.com. You can do it in loving memory of someone who's passed or in honor of someone. And just delighted to have your support to continue on this path. So thank you again, holding all of you very much so, as I know there's been lots and ups and downs in this week, of course, throughout the world. So I look forward to connecting next Motzei Shabbat. We will enter Vayera together. Take care of yourselves, practice during the week,